I'm here on behalf of my cousin Les Halpin, who sadly isn't well enough to be here today. As many of you, or most of you will know, Les has motor neurone disease, which was diagnosed last year. As a result of developing this illness, Les, who has a background as a statistician, looked in great detail into what research has been done into the treatment of motor neurone disease and discovered that progress in this area had been very limited. He had had first-hand experience of seeing both a very close friend die of motor neurone disease about 20 years ago, and a family member, actually my father, die of motor neurone disease 14 years ago. And his research had showed that very little progress had been made in the intervening 20 years. The film clip that you're about to see explains some of the background of the campaign that Les is leading into access to medicine. This will then be followed by a panel discussion, and Les and Claire are actually following the proceedings of this evening via Skype.
Patients have a critical role to play in raising awareness, and people who are brave enough during a very difficult time for them to go onto the public stage and tell people what the disease means for them have a huge impact.
Right, well, thank you very much everybody for coming along, and I think the fact that so many people here indicates how seriously this issue is now being taken.
I'm here representing the families of people like Les, the people who live with the daily reality of intractable disease, incurable disease in most cases, diseases that are life-limiting, that constrain the quality and the quantity of life for those people who are affected by them.
I think we're meeting at a rather pivotal time, actually. I mean, obviously anyone facing a serious disease, it's a pivotal time for them, but it's a pivotal time for the innovation process, because there is, frankly, a loss of confidence in the life sciences innovation process. I've worked in life sciences myself for, I must be 25 years. This is the first time in that period that major companies who should be developing the drugs that we're talking about here are actually cutting back their R&D budgets.
The problem is that companies who wish eventually to have the drug licensed are very hesitant about giving drugs to people to be used under uncontrolled conditions in case they get a bad result, and this then harms their licensing. But drugs are occasionally made available on compassionate use for patients who urgently need them even before they're licensed, to be given by individual physicians on the named patient exemption.
There's only one drug to treat motor neurone disease at the moment, and even that one drug, as I understand it, and there are many experts on the panel here who know much more about this than I do, really all it does is to alleviate the symptoms and prolong life for a little bit. It's not a cure by any means.
The challenge, and listening to your story, the challenge is that all our cases are absolutely time critical. We don't have time to go through court proceedings if it affects us and our families. Because it is time critical, not only are we prepared to take risks to improve the quality of our lives in the full knowledge that there might be huge risks to our health, but we want to do it for the next generation, because particularly if it's genetic and we face the thought of maybe our children going through this, so we're more than prepared to be guinea pigs.
I know people at university doing medical degrees that get absolutely no education on rare diseases, and it's quite a large group when you put it all together.
I think part of what this campaign ought to push for is a much more proactive role of the NHS in doing clinical research, not just on rare conditions, but on all conditions. One of the people on the film, Nick Edwards, my colleague, was the guy who demonstrated that the percentage of trial patients in the UK had fallen from 6% of the world's population of trial patients to 2% over a decade.
Yeah.
I think we need to, part of the message of the campaign ought to be the NHS is a wonderful vehicle for doing clinical trials. The patients want to do it, we should demand it.
One of the things that really struck home to me was that actually phase 3 trials actually really don't look at real life. They look at a group of people who very often only have one illness, don't have multiple illnesses. They often exclude elderly people, and I'm a geriatrician, and actually every day I'm using drugs that haven't actually been tested specifically in elderly people because they've been excluded from phase 3 trials. And actually what Professor Latchman was saying about sort of doing away with phase 3 trials, or perhaps using phase 3 trials and looking at using drugs at an earlier stage and using the two in parallel would actually be a much more effective way of trying to assess whether drugs are useful or not, because you're actually looking at them in real life.
The first two phases of drug regulation, the first is for safety and the second is for efficacy, both done on quite small numbers of patients. But at the end of that time, one has good data and one would be able to go to potential patients, tell them what we know about benefits, what we know about risks, and subject to their being willing to accede to what is known, in my view they should be allowed to have these drugs at that stage subject to their signing a legally binding indemnity. And this system would work in parallel with the doing of phase 3 trials, so that one would actually get some real data to compare the qualities which you gain by treating people earlier and those you possibly lose by having some side effects in post-release rather than in phase 3 against the present system. And my own pretty firm conviction is it would be found out to be highly advantageous to release good drugs earlier, and people would then gradually take this up more and more.
As soon as I met Les, his charisma, his communication ability convinced me that this present system, bringing drugs to the patient, is far too slow. If I can in any way cause the present system to be improved so that we get these drugs to the patients quicker, to provide a cure for these dreadful diseases like motor neuron disease, like Alzheimer's disease, then I will have fulfilled exactly the legacy that Les set out and asked me to do.